The deck of the Liberty was taut with a razor-sharp tension under the encroaching shadow of the darkening sky. The wooden planks of the ship creaked faintly, as if in anticipation of what was to come. The tall mast swayed gently, stirred by a faint, icy whisper of wind, an ominous prelude to something greater. The surface of the sea was unnervingly still, as though holding its breath in suspense. A storm was approaching. Captain Elias Whitmore stood resolute at the helm, his weathered hand clutching the wheel. His piercing eyes scanned the horizon, where the ominous black clouds coiled like predators. Though his face was calm, the weight of countless voyages lay etched in his features. The sea, he knew, was both a relentless adversary and a merciless teacher. "The sea tests us today," Elias murmured to himself, his tone steady, devoid of fear, yet laced with an air of quiet foreboding. On the far side of the deck, young Finn fumbled with the ropes, his raw hands trembling against the coarse fibers. He was diligent but inexperienced, the salty wind reddening his cheeks and betraying his unease. He pulled the knot tight and glanced nervously at the captain, who seemed like an immovable rock amidst the restless tide. Elias approached him with deliberate steps and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Your first storm, Finn?" Elias asked, a faint smile softening his otherwise steely demeanor. Finn nodded, unable to find his voice. His wide eyes betrayed a mix of awe and fear. Elias chuckled quietly, the sound low and warm like a hearth in winter. "Storms are honest teachers," he said. "They'll show you who you really are. All you need to do is tighten the sails and keep your eyes open." Elsewhere, old seaman Caleb, the ship's grizzled mentor, leaned heavily on the ship's railing. His gray beard danced with the rising wind, and his sharp, weathered eyes were locked on the gathering storm. He shuffled toward Elias, his voice a low growl, carrying the weight of years spent surviving the sea's wrath. "I've seen skies like this before," Caleb muttered. 20 years ago, a storm like this sank a dozen ships without a trace." Elias didn't look at him but nodded thoughtfully. "Then we'll be the ones who survive it this time," he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that settled heavily in the air. Caleb regarded him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You've always been an optimist, Captain. But even optimism won't steady a mast once the wind decides to have its way." Before Elias could reply, a shadow appeared on the distant horizon. A ripple of unease swept through the crew. Elias raised his spyglass and focused on the shape. His jaw tightened as he made out the distinctive black sails. Pirates. Every sailor knew the stories. How these ghostly ships hunted through storms, preying on those too weak to fight back. Few lived to tell the tale. Elias lowered the spyglass and turned to Caleb, his face set like stone. "We have more than the storm to contend with today." Caleb let out a sharp breath. "So it's them then, the black sails." Elias's eyes never left the horizon. "We've got a storm at our backs and death in front of us. But this ship," he said, his voice rising with unshakable resolve, "will not fall to either." Finn overheard the captain's words and swallowed hard, the knot in his stomach twisting tighter. Yet for the first time a spark of courage flickered within him. Liberty was more than a ship, it was their home, their hope, their sanctuary. And as long as Elias Whitmore stood at its helm, it was a fortress against whatever the sea threw at them. When the storm finally broke, it was as though the sky and sea had erupted into a battle of gods. The wind screamed as it tore through the Liberty's sails, whipping them into frenzied chaos. The ropes groaned under the strain, and the ship shuddered violently with each rise and fall over the mountainous waves. The sea was as dark as liquid obsidian, its surface churning with raw power, while lightning illuminated the scene in blinding flashes. Elias stood at the helm, his hands gripping the wheel like a vice. His every muscle was taut, yet his expression remained eerily calm. His voice cut through the roaring storm like a blade. "Steady, hold your ground. This ship will not fall, not to the waves or the wind." The crew scrambled to obey his commands, their faces pale but determined. Finn was among them, clutching the ropes with trembling hands as the salt spray stung his skin. Fear gnawed at his resolve, but he forced himself to stay focused. Every time his courage wavered, he looked to Elias, a figure as immovable as the ship's mast. Through the chaos, Elias's sharp eyes caught a glimpse of the distant black sails, their sinister silhouette etched against the storm-lit horizon. The pirate ship was closing in, defying the storm's fury as if driven by an unholy force. Elias's jaw clenched. He knew the crew could handle the storm, but the combined threat of the pirates and the sea was almost insurmountable. "Caleb!" Elias called out. The old sailor appeared at his side, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "That ship," Elias said, nodding toward the encroaching shadow. "It's still coming." Caleb squinted into the distance and let out a low growl. "They're no fools, Captain. They'll use the storm to cover their advance. But it's madness. This storm will kill them before they reach us." Elias's lips tightened into a thin line. "Then we'll show them what true madness looks like." The pirate ship struck with ruthless precision. Grappling hooks flew through the storm, latching onto the Liberty's rails with a series of sharp clangs. Lightning illuminated the scene as the pirates began to board the ship, their figures shadowy and menacing. Their cries were almost drowned out by the thunder, but the flash of their blades was unmistakable. "Prepare for battle," Elias roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Defend the Liberty!" The crew sprang into action, armed with whatever they could find. Finn's heart pounded as he gripped his sword for the first time. He looked to Caleb, who was loading his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Keep your focus, boy," Caleb muttered. "They're flesh and blood just like us." The first pirate charged toward Finn, his blade gleaming wickedly in the storm's light. Finn froze for a moment, his fear rooting him in place. But as the pirate's blade descended, Finn raised his own weapon in a desperate block. The clash of steel rang out across the deck, a sound that seemed to momentarily overpower even the storm. Finn's hands shook, but he stood his ground. Elias remained at the helm, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. The Liberty was holding its own against the pirates, but their advantage wouldn't last. The only way to escape was to use the storm itself. "Caleb!" Elias called out. "Prepare the crew. We're taking this fight into the waves." Caleb stared at him, his eyes widening in disbelief. "You can't mean—" "I mean exactly that," Elias interrupted. "We're heading straight into the heart of the storm. The sea will destroy them before it destroys us." Caleb hesitated for only a moment before nodding grimly. "You're a madman, Captain," he muttered. "But this kind of madness might just work." Elias turned to the crew and bellowed, "Brace yourselves. We're riding the waves into victory." The Liberty surged forward as Elias steered, it toward a monstrous wave that towered over them like a mountain. The ship's planks groaned under the strain, but Elias's grip on the wheel was unwavering. Finn held onto the ropes, his knuckles white as he stared at the wall of water rising before them. Behind them, the pirate ship faltered. Its crew, unable to match the Liberty's daring maneuver, struggled to maintain control. The wave crashed down upon them with devastating force, ripping their grappling hooks free and tossing the ship like a toy in the storm's wrath. As the pirate ship disappeared into the churning depths, the Liberty crested the wave and descended into a brief stretch of calmer waters. The crew let out a ragged cheer, their relief palpable, but Elias's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "We're not safe yet," he said to Caleb, his voice low but steady. "The storm isn't finished with us?" Caleb nodded, his rifle slung back over his shoulder. "You've led us through hell, Captain. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Elias tightened his grip on the wheel, his expression unreadable. The storm's fury was far from spent, but for now the Liberty sailed on. The storm continued to rage, the Liberty battling each wave like a soldier holding the line in a never-ending war. Yet through the flashes of lightning and the relentless rain, the pirate ship remained in sight. Its torn black sails loomed like the wings of a predator, defying the storm's fury with an almost supernatural persistence. "This is impossible," Caleb muttered as he joined Elias at the helm. His voice trembled with something that wasn't fear. It was something deeper, an unease he hadn't felt in years. "That ship, it's not natural. It moves like it's alive, like a legend come to life." Elias's gaze never left the distant figure. His jaw tightened and his hands gripped the wheel even harder. "Then we'll have to become legends ourselves. Caleb, Liberty will not fall to a storm or to them." Finn, clutching the ropes with raw, bleeding hands, overheard the captain's words. He swallowed hard, his chest tightening. The fear he felt threatened to overwhelm him, but Elias's voice had a way of cutting through the chaos. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. With the unyielding confidence of a man who had faced the sea's worst and lived to tell the tale. The pirate ship grew closer, its silhouette illuminated with each lightning flash. Finn felt his stomach churn as he noticed the faint outline of the skull and crossbones, emblem painted on the torn sails. The stories of the black-sailed ships came rushing back to him. Stories of ghostly crews and cursed captains who hunted the seas in eternal storms. "They're boarding us!" someone shouted, their voice barely audible over the storm's howls. Hooks flew through the air, latching onto the Liberty's rails with a series of sharp metallic clangs. Pirates, their dark figures barely distinguishable in the storm, began climbing aboard with savage speed. Lightning illuminated their faces, scarred, grinning, and wild with bloodlust. Elias's voice thundered over the chaos. "Arm yourselves. Defend the Liberty." Finn's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed a sword from a nearby barrel. His hands shook as he tightened his grip on the hilt, the cold metal unfamiliar in his grasp. Caleb stood beside him, calmly loading his rifle. "Keep your head steady, boy," Caleb said, his voice low and steady despite the storm. "They're just men. They bleed like we do." The first pirate leapt onto the deck, a hulking figure whose blade glinted in the storm's light. Finn froze for a split second, his body rooted in place by sheer terror. The pirate charged, his sword swinging downward in a deadly arc. At the last possible moment, Finn raised his own weapon, blocking the strike with a resounding clash of steel. The impact jarred his arms, but he held firm. He didn't have time to think. His instincts took over as he parried and dodged, each movement a desperate attempt to survive. Caleb fired his rifle, taking down a pirate mid-charge. He reloaded with practiced efficiency, glancing over at Finn. "Not bad, boy," he muttered, a rare hint of approval in his voice. Elias remained at the helm, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. The Liberty's crew was holding their ground, but the pirates kept coming. The black-sailed ship was dangerously close now, its deck swarming with reinforcements. They couldn't outfight them, not like this. The only way to win was to use the storm itself. "Caleb!" Elias shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The old sailor hurried over, wiping rain from his face. "We need to lead them into the storm's heart," Elias said. "The sea will do what we cannot." Caleb blinked, his expression shifting between disbelief and grim understanding. "You're insane, Captain," he muttered, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "But maybe that kind of madness is what we need." Elias turned to the crew, his voice booming with authority. "Brace yourselves. We're taking this fight to the waves." The Liberty lurched as Elias steered it toward a towering wave rising ahead of them like a giant preparing to strike. Finn clung to the ropes as the ship climbed the massive swell. The pirate ship followed close behind, its crew scrambling to maintain control. Elias's plan was simple but daring. lead the pirates into the wave's path, where the storm's full force would crush them. The Liberty crested the wave, its hull groaning under the strain. The pirate ship was not so lucky. The wave crashed down on it with devastating power, tearing through its already battered frame. The grappling hook snapped free, and the pirate ship capsized, its black sails disappearing beneath the raging waters. The crew of the Liberty erupted into cheers, their voices raw with relief. But Elias remained silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The storm wasn't finished with them yet. For a brief moment, the storm seemed to ease. The rain slowed, and the wind's howl softened to a low moan. Caleb approached Elias, resting a hand on the captain's shoulder. "They're gone, Captain," Caleb said. "You did it." Elias nodded but didn't relax. His hands remained firm on the wheel, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We've outlasted the pirates, Caleb," he said quietly. "Now we just need to outlast the sea." The Liberty sailed on, its battered frame defying the storm's fury. The crew worked tirelessly, their spirits buoyed by their victory, but tempered by the knowledge that the storm was far from over. Above them, the dark clouds still churned, and the sea beneath them whispered of challenges yet to come. The storm had not relented, and the Liberty, though battered, pressed onward. Yet danger loomed closer than ever. Caleb had discovered the mainmast's base was splitting. The cracks ran deep, and the mast trembled with every gust of wind and every crash of a wave. Caleb approached Elias, his face pale. "The mast won't hold, Captain. Another gust like that, and it'll take the sails, and us with it." Elias remained silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the weary faces of his crew. They had fought through the storm, survived the pirates, and were holding together by sheer force of will. But without the mast, all their efforts would be in vain. Elias finally nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We'll stabilize it," he said, his tone calm but commanding. Caleb stepped forward quickly. "I'll do it." "No," Elias interrupted firmly. "It has to be me." The old sailor froze, his weathered face falling. "Captain, you can't—" Elias turned to him, his expression resolute. "This crew needs you at the helm, Caleb. You'll guide them to the harbor. This mast won't last another minute unless someone climbs it and secures it. That someone is me." Finn, who had been struggling with the ropes nearby, overheard the conversation and ran forward. "But Captain, if you go up there, you won't survive." Elias knelt slightly to meet Finn's panicked eyes. He rested a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. "A captain sacrifices for his crew. That's the way of things, Finn. Now I need you to be strong. Keep this ship moving. Protect her no matter what." Finn tried to protest, but Elias had already turned back to Caleb. "Take the helm," he ordered, "and make sure this ship reaches the harbor." "That's an order." Caleb nodded reluctantly, his face a mask of anguish. "Aye, Captain." Without another word, Elias moved to the mast. The crew watched in stunned silence as he began climbing, his silhouette stark against the storm-lit sky. Every step was a battle against the howling wind and the swaying mast. Rain lashed at him, the salt stinging the cuts on his hands, but he pressed on. The mast groaned ominously under the strain, but Elias climbed higher. With a deft motion, he tied the first rope, then the second, pulling them taut to stabilize the mast. His arms burned with exertion, and his breaths came in short, sharp gasps. Below, Caleb shouted to the crew, "Hold steady! We're almost through!" But his voice faltered as the mast let out a deafening crack. Elias, now at the top, looked down at his crew one last time. "Guide her to the harbor!" he shouted over the storm, his voice ringing with authority. His final words were drowned out by the sound of the mast breaking apart. A massive wave struck the Liberty, the impact throwing the ship sideways. The mast splintered, and Elias disappeared into the raging sea. "Captain!" Finn screamed, running to the railing. He peered into the darkness, but there was nothing, only the endless churn of the stormy ocean. Through Elias's sacrifice, the mast held just long enough. With Caleb at the helm and the crew working tirelessly, the Liberty broke free of the storm. The waters began to calm, and the faint glow of the harbor lights appeared on the horizon. Relief spread through the crew, but it was muted by the heavy absence of their captain. As the Liberty reached the harbor, Finn secured the ropes with trembling hands. He turned to look back at the sea, his chest tight with grief. Caleb stepped forward, his voice low and heavy with emotion. "He saved us," he said. "This ship would never have made it without him." Caleb's eyes turned to the crew, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he recited words that seemed to rise from the storm itself. "But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead." The crew stood in solemn silence, their heads bowed in respect. Elias was gone, but his sacrifice would live on in every soul aboard the Liberty. The Liberty was rebuilt in the weeks that followed. Its hull was reinforced, its mast replaced, but its spirit remained the same. The crew sailed once more, carrying with them the memory of their captain. Elias's name became a legend whispered across the seas, a story of sacrifice, leadership, and unyielding courage. The Liberty's flag, once a mere symbol, was now a testament to the captain who gave everything for his crew. And so, Captain Elias Whitmore's story echoed through the waves, carried by the winds, forever a part of the sea's eternal song.